Now, email is probably one of the most heavily used features of the internet now, and even in our local area networks. We have two main components for email, the mail server and the clients. Now, email uses a traditional TCP/IP model for communications. Routing is done between the servers on the IP addresses, as well as the connection from the client to the server. Now, you may have to cross security perimeters, and so those perimeters might be involved. For instance, it's one thing to send email within my local area network, but now if I want to send it outside, perhaps even through the internet, more than likely you're going to have to go through a firewall to do that. Users can also attach binary files, and those have to be encoded in a way that they can be sent across the network. Binary files, by the way, they're not talking about sending executables and malware, which people do anyway, but also your picture files and document files and those types of files. When we look at the issues of security for email, one of the first things we have to look at is an improperly configured mail server, because it can become misused. I'll use it as an example, something like Microsoft Exchange Server. And by the way, I'm not saying at all that it's a bad product. It's a great product. But we have to remember that every service has a default setup. One of the defaults of Exchange was, and I think it's still true today, to have the ability for you to telnet into the server. And if you knew the proper kinds of commands, you could send email through your telnet commands. That was a great way for people who wanted to borrow your email server to send spam out to 100,000 of their closest friends. We also have to worry about denial of service attacks against the mail server. We want to take a look and say, well, we're sending email, and most email, the traditional SMTP for sending email, the traditional POP3 for the receiving of email, is done in an unencrypted form. That means all email is sent out, and anybody who can intercept or listen in on those communications would have full content of what you've sent. That also means they could alter the email contents. And as I said, people have been using email to distribute malware, although fortunately not as frequently as they used to. But now we're doing other cool things, right? The phishing sites and all of that. Which leads us to the other security issue, the inappropriate use of email, such as not only sending malware or phishing sites, but even internally sending proprietary or sensitive information about my corporate secrets to maybe somebody else. Now, there are some standards we use for email security. Those standards should address the security aspects of the deployment of the mail server through maintenance and other administrative standards. Basically, I should say that the standards should hopefully make sure we don't just do default deployments, and that we're keeping up to date on security patches and maintenance. We want to make sure that it's being deployed, the email server, according to your security policy and your guidelines. And you should consider the use of encryption technologies for the email that you're sending out. At least, you can't stop somebody from sending you an unencrypted email, but we can certainly make sure what we send out is as safe and secure as possible. One of the things we should look at is the use of a digital signature to be able to authenticate the transmissions from an untrusted network. Now, a digital signature, and by the way, this is using some of those technologies we talked about with the public key infrastructure, is an appendage to a digital document where we can use it to verify the authenticity of the sender. Now, if it's properly used, the digital signature can't be forged. It can be authenticated and encrypted. And the other cool thing is we can't reuse it because it signs each piece of mail that we send. And the signed document can't be altered. Well, that's not true. We could alter it, but we would detect that it was altered. So that's why we say it can't be altered, because we could immediately know that it was. Now, if you're wondering about the process of this, it's certainly something you can look up. But it's a combination of the certificate, your public and private key, and hashing algorithms that we use to accomplish these feats. Now, when we talk about the encryption for securing email, there are two types. There's a symmetric encryption, and those models are things like DES, the Data Encryption Standard, triple DES, doing DES 3 times, and the Advanced Encryption Standard, AES. The asymmetric encryption we use, at least on a public side, is usually called RSA, by the people who designed it, Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman. And that asymmetric is the one that uses the two key pairs I talked about. One we typically call a public key, the other one we call a private key. In symmetric encryption, we just use one key, often called a session key, sometimes called a private key. And the idea behind them is symmetric encryption we use for the large amounts of data that we want to encrypt. The key that we use to encrypt it is the same key that decrypts it. With asymmetric, you have two keys. Whichever one you use to do the encryption, the other key is used to do the decryption. You can't use the same key for both options. And we use these in concert with each other to be able to not only exchange, we use actually asymmetric encryption often to exchange a symmetric key, usually for secure communications like SSL, but we can also use that for the way in which we secure information. If you think about it, if I want to send you an email that is encrypted and only you can read it, I would use your public key. The reason it's called public is everybody has access to it. I'd encrypt it with your public key and send it to you, therefore only your private key can unlock it. Another type of electronic system we see in the world of commerce is called the POS, the point of sale systems. Now these are systems that are enabled to capture data, to do it at a time and place that the transaction occurs, primarily when you're checking out. Now most commonly these might be credit and debit cards that we're using that we know are associated with your bank accounts. And that point of sale system may have an attached peripheral equipment, like the magnetic card readers for your debit cards, or barcodes if you're at a grocery store and they're scanning those barcodes to put the information in about what you're buying. What you want to do as an auditor is determine whether or not the credit card holder information is stored at the local point of sale system, and if it is, you want to look to see if it's using strong encryption to keep those contents secret or confidential.